all set in motion by one woman's desperate attempt to rebuild her life after losing everything in bankruptcy, a chance discovery that would eventually bring Department of Defense historians to her small-town storefront, trigger emergency meetings at the Smithsonian Institution, and ultimately reveal battle plans from Confederate General Robert E. that had been hidden for over 160 years. Plans that contradicted everything historians thought they knew about the Civil War's most decisive battle. Before we dive into this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. And if this story amazes you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I have something even more shocking to share with you. The morning sun cast long shadows through the dusty windows of Morningstar Bakery as 34-year-old Sarah Williams stood in the empty storefront, trying to convince herself she hadn't just made the biggest mistake of her life. The keys felt impossibly heavy in her trembling hand, skis to a business that had failed 3 times in the past 5 years. It's in a building that looked like it hadn't seen a proper renovation since the 1970s. Just 24 months earlier, Sarah had been living what many would consider the American dream. She and her husband David owned Williams & Co. Catering, one of Philadelphia's most prestigious catering companies, specializing in high-end corporate events and luxury wedding receptions. Their business had built such a reputation for excellence that they were booked solid 18 months in advance, with waiting lists for their most popular dates. Sarah handled all the baking and dessert creations, spending her days crafting elaborate wedding cakes and artisanal pastries that had earned her recognition from Philadelphia Magazine as one of the city's rising culinary stars. Her signature 7-layer Italian cream cake had become legendary among Philadelphia's social elite, and food bloggers regularly featured her innovative flavor combinations: lavender honey with lemon mascarpone, bourbon vanilla with salted caramel, dark chocolate with espresso and candied orange peel. David managed the business operations, client relations, and logistics that kept their operation running smoothly. Together, they had built something remarkable from nothing. Starting with Sarah's grandmother's recipes and David's business degree from Temple University, they had met in 2014 at a wedding where Sarah was providing desserts as a side business while working full-time at a downtown hotel, and David was the groomsman who spent the entire reception raving about her tiramisu. "You should be doing this full-time," he had told her that night, business card in hand. "I could help you build something special." And they had. By 2016, they had left their day jobs and established Williams & Co. Catering in a commercial kitchen space in South Philadelphia. By 2018, they had moved to their own facility, a beautiful converted warehouse with state-of-the-art equipment and enough space to handle events for 500 guests. By 2020, they owned a stunning colonial home in Chestnut Hill, were planning to start a family, and had begun discussing expansion into a second location in New York. Sarah's custom wedding cakes were works of art that regularly commanded $2,000 to $5,000 per creation. Her signature technique involved hand-painted fondant work that looked like watercolor paintings, combined with flavor profiles that challenged traditional wedding cake expectations. Brides would book her services 2 years in advance, and her Instagram account had attracted 50,000 followers who eagerly awaited each new creation. The catering side of their business was equally successful. Corporate clients included law firms, medical practices, and financial services companies that relied on Williams & Co. for everything from intimate partner dinners to annual galas. Their largest contract was a yearly retainer with Meridian Financial Group, providing catering for monthly board meetings and quarterly investor presentations, a relationship worth nearly $80,000 annually. David had always been the numbers person, the one who negotiated contracts, managed cash flow, and handled the increasingly complex logistics of running a growing business. Sarah trusted him completely with the financial aspects of their operation, focusing her energy on perfecting recipes and maintaining the quality standards that had built their reputation. That trust, Sarah would later realize, had been her greatest mistake. The first sign of trouble came in February 2022, when their primary supplier began demanding cash payments instead of the net 30 terms they had enjoyed for years. David had explained it as a temporary cash flow issue. Several large clients had been slow to pay invoices, creating a temporary shortage that would resolve itself within weeks. "It's just timing," he had assured Sarah when she questioned why. They suddenly couldn't afford to pay their flour and sugar supplier on schedule. "The Meridian contract payment is 3 weeks late, and the Peterson wedding payment won't clear until Friday. Everything will normalize once we get caught up." But the cash flow problems didn't normalize. By March, they were juggling payments, delaying orders, and David was spending increasing amounts of time on phone calls with creditors, explaining why payments would be just a few days late while working out extended payment schedules. Sarah began noticing other warning signs that David dismissed as temporary complications. Their business checking account balance seemed to fluctuate wildly from day to day. Vendor checks that should have cleared were bouncing. Equipment lease payments that had been automatic for years were suddenly requiring manual intervention. The devastating truth emerged on March 15th, 2022, a Tuesday that started like any other, but ended with Sarah's entire world collapsing. She had arrived at their kitchen at 6 a.m. to begin preparation for the Spencer Morrison wedding, a 300-guest celebration that represented one of their largest contracts of the year. The bride had ordered a 5-tier cake featuring hand-painted sugar flowers and gold leaf details, plus dessert stations for 300 guests, a project that would require 2 full days of intensive preparation. At 8:30 a.m., as Sarah was tempering chocolate for the dessert stations, 2 men in suits appeared at their kitchen door. She assumed they were early vendors or perhaps representatives from the venue conducting a routine inspection. "Are you Sarah Williams?" the taller man asked, producing official-looking paperwork. "We're here to repossess equipment and inventory on behalf of Allied Commercial Finance." Sarah stared at the documents in confusion. There must be some mistake. "Our equipment leases are current. My husband handles all the payments and everything is up to date. Ma'am, according to our records, Williams & Co. Catering is 3 months behind on equipment lease payments, totaling $18,450. We have authorization to reclaim all leased equipment immediately." The next hour was a nightmare of desperate phone calls to David, who didn't answer his phone. While the repo men systematically loaded their commercial ovens, mixers, and refrigeration units onto trucks, Sarah watched 5 years of careful business building disappear into vehicles parked outside their kitchen, unable to do anything but demand explanations that weren't forthcoming. David finally returned her calls at 10:15 a.m. Just as the repo trucks were pulling away from their empty kitchen. "Sarah, I can explain everything." His voice carried a strain she had never heard before. "I've been trying to fix this without worrying you. I had a system, a way to win back everything we needed. I just needed more time to make it work." "Win back?" Sarah's voice barely managed to form the words. "Win back what, David? What are you talking about?" The truth emerged in fragments over the following hours, each revelation more devastating than the last. David had been gambling, initially just occasional trips to Atlantic City that he characterized as business networking with potential clients. But casual gambling had evolved into a compulsion that consumed increasing amounts of time and money. When his gambling losses began exceeding their personal savings, David had convinced himself that bigger bets would allow him to recover everything he had lost. He had secretly taken cash advances on their business credit cards, telling himself that one good weekend would restore everything he had borrowed. When credit card advances weren't sufficient, David had forged Sarah's signature to remortgage their home, extracting $85,000 in equity that he was certain he could double at the blackjack tables. When that money disappeared, he had begun skipping equipment, lease payments, and vendor bills, using operating funds to cover gambling debts while promising himself that his next trip to the casino would solve everything. "I had a system," David explained through tears that afternoon. As they sat in their empty kitchens surrounded by the remnants of their business, "I was tracking the patterns, keeping detailed records. I was so close to breaking even, Sarah. Just a few more good hands and I could have paid everything back." But there was no breaking even. Over 18 months, David had gambling losses totaling nearly $200,000 money that had come from their business accounts, personal savings, home equity, and deferred payments to vendors and creditors. Their business checking account showed a balance of $47, and their personal account contained $132. The Spencer Morrison wedding, which should have provided $12,000 in revenue, became impossible to fulfill without equipment or ingredients. Canceling the contract meant not only losing the payment, but also refunding the $6,000 deposit they had already spent on operations. Within 2 weeks, the cascade of consequences became unstoppable. Vendors who had extended credit based on Williams & Co.'s previously excellent payment history began demanding immediate settlement. The health department suspended their commercial kitchen license when equipment inspections revealed violations they couldn't afford to correct. Corporate clients began canceling contracts when word spread through Philadelphia's tight-knit catering community about the equipment repossession. Most devastating was losing the Meridian financial contract, their largest and most stable source of revenue. The company's executive assistant called personally to explain that they couldn't risk their corporate events with a caterer facing obvious financial instability. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," she said with genuine regret. "Everyone here loves your desserts, and we hate to do this. We can't take chances with client events. I hope you understand." Sarah understood completely, which made it even more heartbreaking. 5 years of building relationships, maintaining quality, and exceeding expectations were destroyed by 2 weeks of revealed financial chaos that had been hidden from everyone, including her. The bankruptcy filing became inevitable when their attorney, Patricia Kowalski, explained that their debts exceeded their assets by more than $150,000. Equipment leases, vendor payments, credit card advances, and mortgage obligations had created a financial crater that no amount of future earnings could reasonably address. "I'm sorry to be blunt," Attorney Kowalski had explained during their consultation, "but your business is insolvent, and your personal assets are insufficient to cover business debts." Chapter 7 Bankruptcy will eliminate most obligations while protecting whatever exempt assets you're entitled to keep. The bankruptcy process stripped away everything they had built together. Their commercial kitchen was auctioned to satisfy creditor claims. Their home was foreclosed and sold with proceeds applied to the outstanding mortgage balance. Their business equipment, including Sarah's treasured copper mixing bowls and her grandmother's vintage cake pans, was liquidated to generate cash for creditor distributions. David disappeared 3 days after the final bankruptcy hearing, leaving behind only a handwritten note. "Sarah, I destroyed everything we worked for, and I can't face what I've done to you. You deserve a chance to rebuild without carrying the weight of my mistakes. I'm going to live with my brother in Las Vegas while I figure out how to get my life together. Please don't try to find me until I can figure out how to become someone worthy of your forgiveness." The note was accompanied by divorce papers he had already signed, along with a quitclaim deed transferring any remaining interest in their assets to Sarah. Even in his betrayal, David had tried to ensure that Sarah wouldn't be burdened by any future debts or obligations he might create. Sarah found herself at 34 years old with nothing but her personal belongings. A 2019 Honda Civic with 180,000 miles that had somehow avoided repossession, and $12,000 from the sale of her grandmother's jewelry, the only assets the bankruptcy court had classified as exempt personal property. The jewelry sale had been particularly painful. Her grandmother's pearl necklace, wedding ring, and sapphire brooch represented the last tangible connections to the woman who had taught Sarah to bake, who had shared family recipes and stories about opening her own bakery during the Great Depression. But survival required sacrificing sentiment. The $12,000 provided enough cushion to avoid immediate homelessness. While she figured out how to rebuild from nothing, for 8 months, Sarah had lived with her sister Rebecca in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in Norristown. Arrangement that was supposed to be temporary, but had stretched on as Sarah struggled to find direction for her life. Rebecca, a nurse at Einstein Medical Center, had generously offered her couch and emotional support, but the arrangement strained both sisters as weeks turned into months. Sarah had taken a job at Sweet Dreams Bakery, a chain operation that mass-produced cupcakes, cookies, and birthday cakes for suburban families. The work paid $12 an hour, plus minimal benefits, just enough to cover her share of rent and basic expenses while contributing to Rebecca's household. But the job was soul-crushing for someone who had spent years creating custom confections for Adelphia's most discerning clients. Sweet Dreams operated from standardized recipes using pre-made mixes and artificial flavoring. Like Sarah's workdays, involved decorating identical birthday cakes with buttercream roses and happy birthday messages in primary colors. A mind-numbing routine that used none of her skills and offered no creative satisfaction. "You're wasting your talent," Rebecca told her repeatedly. "You could get hired at any high-end restaurant in Philadelphia, La Bernardine, Vetri, any of the places that would appreciate what you can do." But Sarah couldn't bear the thought of working for someone else in the industry where she had once been successful. Every job interview felt like admitting defeat, like accepting that she would never again have the independence and creativity that had made her love baking in the first place. The idea of working in someone else's kitchen, following someone else's recipes, taking orders from chefs who might not appreciate her experience, it all felt like confirmation that bankruptcy had destroyed not just her business, but her identity as a culinary professional. Worse, working in the industry meant constant reminders of what she had lost. Former clients would recognize her, offering sympathetic smiles and awkward conversations about what happened to Williams & Co. Catering. Vendors who had once courted her business would greet her with the careful politeness reserved for people whose circumstances had dramatically changed. The emotional weight of these encounters was almost unbearable. Sarah had worked so hard to build respect and recognition in Philadelphia's competitive culinary scene. Seeing that respect replaced by pity felt worse than anonymous failure. The idea of buying the failed Morningstar Bakery had come from a Craigslist ad that Rebecca had forwarded as a dark joke during one of their Friday evening conversations about Sarah's future. "Look at this," Rebecca had laughed, showing Sarah the ad on her phone. $450 for an entire building. There's got to be something seriously wrong with it. Maybe it's haunted or built on a toxic waste dump. The ad was brief and honest. "Historic bakery building for sale. Harrisburg, PA. $450. Cash only, as is condition." Perfect for someone with more dreams than sense. Serious inquiries only. Sarah had initially dismissed the idea as ridiculous. Of commercial buildings sold for less than the cost of a used appliance, but something about the ad nagged at her, perhaps the seller's brutal honesty about the property. Being suitable for someone with more dreams than sense, that phrase resonated with Sarah in a way she hadn't expected. She was someone with more dreams than sense. Someone whose practical judgment had been compromised by the desire to believe that things could be different. The bankruptcy had stripped away her illusions about financial security and business success. It hadn't eliminated her fundamental belief that with enough determination and hard work, it might be possible to rebuild something meaningful. The drive to Harrisburg took 45 minutes through Pennsylvania, countryside that was showing the first hints of autumn color. Sarah had called in sick to Sweet Dreams the first time she had missed work in 8 months and made the trip. On a Tuesday morning, when traffic was light and her anxiety was manageable, the address led her to a narrow, 3-story brick building squeezed between vintage treasures. A clothing store that appeared to specialize in 1970s Euro women's wear, and Martinez Tax Services, an office with hand-painted signs in both English and Spanish. The bakery building was located on State Street, just 6 blocks from the Pennsylvania State Capitol building, in what appeared to be downtown Harrisburg's slowly revitalizing arts and culture district. The building was clearly old, probably dating to the 1920s based on the architectural details, but it had good bones. The storefront windows were intact and substantial. The brick facade showed no obvious structural problems, and the location offered foot traffic from both government workers and tourists visiting the Capitol complex. Margaret Chen, the 70-year-old owner, met Sarah at the front door with a ring of ancient brass keys and a weary expression that suggested she had shown the property to too many dreamers who couldn't follow through on their ambitious plans. "I'll be honest with you right from the start," Mrs. Chen said as she unlocked the front door. 3 different people have tried to make a go of this place in the past 5 years. All of them were experienced bakers. All of them had more money than you probably do based on your phone call, and all of them gave up within 18 months. The candor was refreshing after months of carefully diplomatic conversations about Sarah's transition period and new opportunities. Mrs. Chen was offering truth without pity, practical information without false encouragement. The interior was a mixture of obvious potential and significant problems. The main retail space featured beautiful original tin ceilings and hardwood floors that were scuffed and worn but structurally solid. Large windows provided excellent natural light, and the layout offered good flow between retail display areas and customer seating. The kitchen equipment was outdated but functional: two commercial ovens that appeared to be from the 1990s, a large Hobart mixer that showed wear but seemed mechanically sound, stainless steel prep tables, and a walk-in cooler that wheezed and rattled but maintained appropriate temperature. But there were also obvious issues that would require attention and investment. The electrical system needed updating to handle modern equipment loads. The plumbing showed signs of minor leaks and old fixtures. The entire building had the musty smell of a space that had been closed up for too long, suggesting possible moisture problems or inadequate ventilation. Most concerning, the wooden floor in the kitchen area showed significant warping and water damage near the back wall. With several boards that had clearly been affected by persistent moisture problems. The last tenant said there was a leak somewhere, Mrs. Chen explained, pointing to the damaged floorboards with obvious frustration. My handyman looked at it twice, but he couldn't find the source. Might be an old pipe running under the floor. This might be foundation issues. Might be something more serious that would require major renovation. As they toured the small apartment on the second floor, a one-bedroom space with basic kitchen facilities, a tiny bathroom, and a view of the state capitol, Mrs. Chen shared the building's recent history with the detached honesty of someone who had been through too many failed business ventures. My late husband bought this building in 1987 as an investment property, she explained, gesturing toward framed photographs of a cheerful Asian man standing in front of the building during its earlier, more prosperous days. For 20 years. It housed Heinrich's German bakery, run by the Hoffman family. When they retired in 2009, we thought it would be easy to find another tenant. But the restaurant business has gotten so much harder, and this location has challenges we didn't anticipate. The first replacement tenant had been Marcus Stillwell, an experienced pastry chef from New York who had grand plans for artisanal breads and European-style pastries. He had invested nearly $40,000 in new equipment and renovation, creating a beautiful space that attracted food bloggers and culinary enthusiasts from across central Pennsylvania. But Marcus had underestimated Harrisburg's market for $8 croissants and $25 artisanal birthday cakes. His products were exceptional, but the local customer base couldn't support the prices necessary to cover his costs and generate reasonable profit. He lasted 14 months before admitting that his concept was too sophisticated for the local market. The second attempt came from Jennifer and Paul Rodriguez, a young couple who wanted to create a cafe combining fresh baked goods with locally roasted coffee. They had fewer resources than Marcus, but more realistic pricing and a better understanding of their potential customer base. The Rodriguez family had built a loyal following among government workers, who appreciated their breakfast pastries and lunch sandwiches, plus weekend customers who came for fresh bread and dinner rolls. But foot traffic was inconsistent. Operating costs were higher than projected, and the couple struggled to generate sufficient revenue to cover rent, utilities, and loan payments on their equipment. They made it 16 months before concluding that their location generated insufficient foot traffic to sustain both retail and wholesale operations. The final month had been particularly difficult, with the couple working 16-hour days. While watching their savings disappear and their relationship deteriorate under financial pressure, the most recent failure had been particularly heartbreaking. Dorothy Martinez, a 58-year-old grandmother, had used her retirement savings to open Abuela's Kitchen, serving traditional Mexican pastries alongside American favorites. Her tres leches cake and conches had attracted customers from Harrisburg's growing Latino community, and her traditional American items, PI chocolate chip cookies, birthday cakes, had built a steady local following. Dorothy had been incredibly dedicated, working 7 days a week, arriving at 4 a.m. to prepare fresh bread and staying until 8 p.m. to serve evening customers. Her products were excellent, her prices were fair, and her customer service was legendary. Among people who had discovered her bakery, But rising ingredient costs increased competition from chain bakeries, and the economic pressure of the COVID-19 pandemic had slowly eroded her profit margins until she was working 18-hour days, just to break even. The final blow came when her largest wholesale customer, a local restaurant that had been buying dinner rolls and desserts, closed permanently, eliminating 30% of her revenue overnight. Dorothy was the one who really broke my heart, Mrs. Chen admitted as they stood in the kitchen where someone had left encouraging messages written in Spanish on a whiteboard. She worked harder than anyone I've ever seen, and her food was incredible. When she finally had to give up, she cried in this kitchen for an hour, apologizing for letting the building down. The asking price of $450 represented Mrs. Chen's desire to find someone who would actually use the space rather than maximize her financial return. At 70 years old, with her husband deceased and her children living in other states, she was more interested in seeing the building occupied than in generating significant income from its sale. At my age, I don't need the money, she explained, with the practical resignation of someone who had learned to prioritize meaning over profit. I need to know that this building will be useful to someone instead of just sitting empty. My husband always said that buildings were meant to have life in them, not just collect dust. The terms were remarkably simple: $450 cash for the building and all remaining equipment, with the buyer responsible for all taxes, utilities, and any necessary repairs. Mrs. Chen would transfer the deed immediately, with no financing contingencies, inspection periods, or other complications that might give either party second thoughts about the transaction. As Sarah stood alone in the empty bakery, after Mrs. Chen left to give her time to consider the decision, she felt the weight of a choice that could define the rest of her life. The logical part of her brain cataloged all the reasons this was a terrible idea. She had extremely limited capital, no business plan, no established customer base in Harrisburg, and no guarantee that she could succeed where 3 previous experienced attempts had failed spectacularly. The damaged floorboards near the back wall seemed to mock her optimism, reminding her that even buildings with good bones could hide expensive problems that destroyed the dreams of people who couldn't afford to fix them. The musty smell suggested moisture issues that could require thousands of dollars in remediation. The outdated electrical system might need complete replacement to handle modern equipment safely. But something about the space called to her in a way that transcended practical calculation. The kitchen felt right in a way that the industrial chain bakery never had. She could imagine herself working at the stainless steel prep tables, smell of fresh bread filling the space, customers gathering in the front room to share coffee and conversation about their daily lives. More importantly, Sarah realized that buying the bakery represented something more than a business investment. It was a chance to reclaim the independence and creativity that bankruptcy had stripped away. At $450, even complete failure wouldn't be financially catastrophic. But success could provide the foundation for rebuilding everything she had lost while creating something entirely her own. The apartment on the second floor, while small and basic, would eliminate rent payments that had been consuming nearly half her monthly income. Living above her business would also allow her to work the early morning hours that bakery operations required without worrying about commuting or maintaining a separate residence. That evening, Sarah called Rebecca from her hotel room in Harrisburg, her sister's contact information highlighted on her phone screen as she struggled with the decision that would determine her immediate future. "I know this sounds completely crazy," she began without preamble, "but I think I'm going to buy it. Sarah, I need you to be brutally honest with me." Rebecca replied with the careful tone of someone who had watched her sister make one life-changing decision already. "That year. Is this really about building a sustainable business? Or is this about running away from Philadelphia and everything that happened there?" It was a fair question that Sarah had been asking herself throughout the afternoon as she explored Harrisburg's downtown area and tried to assess the realistic potential for a bakery in this location. "Maybe it's both," she admitted with the honesty that their relationship had always demanded. "But Rebecca, I've been working for other people for 8 months, and I'm absolutely miserable. I wake up every morning feeling like I'm wasting whatever talent I have left." She paused, looking out her hotel window at the Pennsylvania State Capitol dome, illuminated against the evening sky. This building, it's not perfect, and it definitely has problems. But it's mine for $450. Even if I fail completely, I'll have tried something that was entirely my choice, instead of just accepting that bankruptcy defines the rest of my life. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah could almost hear her sister's nurse, trained analytical, mind working through the practical implications of what she was proposing. "You know, I'll support whatever you decide," Rebecca said finally. "But if you're seriously going to do this, you need to approach it systematically. Have you really thought about what kind of bakery you want to create? What would make you different from the 3 people who failed there before you?" Sarah had been thinking about exactly that question since touring the kitchen and hearing Mrs. Chen's stories about previous tenants. Her experience with high-end catering had taught her techniques and flavor combinations that most small-town bakeries never attempted. She understood food costs, inventory management, and seasonal menu planning. Most importantly, she had learned from David's devastating mistakes about the absolute importance of conservative financial management and scrupulously honest accounting. "I want to focus on what I actually do best," Sarah explained, her voice gaining confidence as she articulated the vision that had been forming throughout the day. Custom cakes and special occasion pastries for people who want something really special, but also high quality. Daily items that working people can afford. It's nothing so fancy that it scares away regular customers, but good enough that people will drive across town specifically for what I'm making. The concept made sense given Harrisburg's demographics and the location near government offices. State workers would provide a reliable breakfast and lunch customer base, while families throughout central Pennsylvania might travel for custom birthday cakes and wedding desserts that offered sophisticated flavors and techniques at reasonable prices. The previous tenants failed because they either aimed to high-end for the local market or couldn't generate enough volume to cover their costs. Sarah continued, her strategic thinking becoming clearer as she spoke. "I think there's a middle ground, really good quality at fair prices, plus custom work that can command higher margins for special occasions." Rebecca's response carried cautious optimism mixed with sisterly concern. "It sounds like you've thought this through more than I expected. But Sarah, $450 is just the beginning. What about startup costs? Ingredients, utilities, business licenses, insurance? How long can you survive if it takes months to build a customer?" Sarah had been calculating exactly those numbers throughout her hotel room deliberations. Her $12,000 in savings would cover the building purchase, initial ingredient inventory, business licensing, basic insurance, and approximately 6 months of minimal living expenses if she was extremely careful with spending. "I've run the numbers," she said, pulling out the notepad where she had itemized startup costs. "If I live in the apartment and keep overhead absolutely minimal, I can operate for 6 months on what I have. That should be enough time to determine whether this can work or whether I need to admit defeat and find another job." The timeline was tight, but it was realistic given her resources and the low cost of the building. More importantly, the 6-month deadline would force her to focus on building revenue quickly rather than getting distracted by expensive improvements or ambitious expansion plans. The next morning, Sarah returned to Harrisburg with $450 in cash, a cashier's check for the first month's utilities, and a determination to transform financial disaster into entrepreneurial opportunity. Mrs. Chen met her at the building with a notary public and all the necessary paperwork for immediate transfer of ownership. "I have a good feeling about you," Mrs. Chen said as she handed over the heavy ring of keys that would unlock Sarah's new life. "You have that look of someone who understands that real success takes time and patience, not quick schemes. The other people who tried this place were in a hurry to get rich or prove something. I think you just want to make good food and build something sustainable." As the notary's seal made the building transfer official, Sarah felt a mixture of terror and exhilaration that she hadn't experienced since her early days. Building the catering business with David, she owned a building, owned a business opportunity, and owned a chance to prove that bankruptcy wasn't the end of her story, but rather the beginning of something completely different. Standing alone in her kitchen after the paperwork was complete and Mrs. Chen had departed with warm wishes for success, Sarah looked around at the space that would determine whether her leap of faith represented brilliant courage or desperate foolishness. The commercial ovens that would need to prove their reliability. The prep tables where she would create products that might restore her professional reputation. The retail space where customers would either embrace or reject her. Vision for what a bakery could be. The damaged floorboards near the back wall caught her attention again. Their warped and discolored wood, serving as a visible reminder that even buildings with good foundations could hide problems that destroyed the dreams of people who couldn't afford to fix them. But those floorboards also represented an opportunity once her business was established and generating reliable income. Repairing that damage would be one of her first improvement projects. For the first time in 20 months, since that devastating March morning, when repo men had loaded her equipment onto trucks, Sarah Williams felt like she was exactly where she needed to be, facing exactly the challenge she was meant to tackle. Tomorrow would bring the hard work of obtaining business licenses, establishing vendor relationships, and turning an empty building into a thriving bakery. But tonight belonged to possibility, and the satisfaction of having chosen hope over fear. The bankrupt widow who had lost everything to her husband's gambling addiction and poor choices was gone, replaced by the owner of Morningstar Bakery. Ready to discover whether $450 could buy a second chance at independence, creativity, and the American dream. As Sarah climbed the narrow stairs to her new apartment, carrying the few possessions she had brought for her overnight stay, she felt a profound sense of purpose that had been missing since the bankruptcy destroyed her previous life. The building she had purchased for less than the cost of a used commercial mixer was about to become the foundation for rebuilding not just her career, but her identity as someone who created beautiful, delicious things that brought joy to other people's lives. She couldn't have imagined, as she fell asleep that first night in the small apartment above her bakery, that the water-damaged floorboards she planned to repair were hiding documents that would transform her simple business venture into one of the most significant historical discoveries in Pennsylvania since the Civil War. The building she had bought as a desperate attempt to rebuild her life was about to reveal secrets that had been waiting over 160 years for someone with the courage to look beneath the surface and the determination to preserve what others might have discarded. The following morning, Sarah woke before dawn in her new apartment, immediately aware of the profound change in her circumstances. For the first time in nearly 2 years, she was waking up in a space that belonged entirely to her, with work ahead. That would directly benefit her own future rather than someone else's business. The sensation was both liberating and terrifying. Her first order of business was assessing the kitchen equipment. More thoroughly than the brief tour with Mrs. Chen had allowed, the 2 commercial ovens appeared to be from the early 1990s old, enough to lack modern safety features but young enough to function reliably if properly maintained. The Hobart mixer showed significant wear but responded normally to all controls. The walk-in cooler maintained appropriate temperature despite concerning mechanical noises that suggested it would need professional attention sooner rather than later. Most importantly, all the equipment was clean and appeared to have been properly maintained by Dorothy Martinez before her bakery failed. The previous tenant had clearly taken pride in her operation, leaving behind detailed cleaning schedules, maintenance logs, and even handwritten notes about the quirks and optimal settings for each piece of equipment. Sarah spent her first week obtaining the necessary business licenses, establishing accounts with ingredient suppliers, and deep cleaning every surface in preparation for health department inspection. The process was tedious but familiar from her catering business experience, and she felt genuine satisfaction in preparing her own commercial kitchen according to her own standards. The health department inspection went smoothly, with the inspector commenting favorably on the kitchen's cleanliness and Sarah's obvious familiarity with commercial food safety requirements. Her business license application was approved without complications, and her basic liability insurance policy went into effect immediately. By the end of her second week, Sarah was ready to begin actual production. She started conservatively, focusing on basic items that would allow her to test her equipment, refine her processes, and begin building relationships with potential customers. fresh bread, simple pastries, coffee cake, and basic cookies products. That showcased quality ingredients and careful technique. Without requiring expensive specialty items or complex preparation, her first customers were government workers who stopped by during their morning commutes, attracted by the fresh-baked daily sign she had placed in the front window and the genuine aroma of bread that filled the street outside her building. The positive response was immediate and encouraging. "This is the best coffee cake I've had since my grandmother died," one regular customer told her during her third week of operation. "What's your secret?" Secret was simply using real butter, fresh eggs, and high-quality vanilla extract instead of the artificial ingredients that most commercial bakeries relied on to reduce costs. Sarah's products weren't revolutionary, but they were made with care and attention that customers immediately recognized and appreciated. Word spread through Harrisburg's small downtown community, and by her fourth week, Sarah was serving 40 to 60 customers daily. Government workers, local business owners, and families who had heard recommendations from friends began establishing Morningstar Bakery as part of their regular routines. The custom cake orders started arriving in her 6th-week birthday cakes, anniversary celebrations, small wedding desserts for couples who wanted something special but couldn't afford elaborate catering. These higher-margin orders provided the financial stability that allowed Sarah to invest in better ingredients and gradually expand her daily offerings. But it was during her 7th week of operation, while attempting to repair the water-damaged floorboards that had bothered her since her first tour of the building, that Sarah Williams would make the discovery that would transform her simple bakery venture into something she could never have imagined. The damaged boards near the back wall had been buckling increasingly as autumn weather caused the building's wood to contract, creating a safety hazard that Sarah could no longer ignore. She had finally saved enough money to hire a local handyman to assess the damage and develop a repair plan that wouldn't disrupt her growing business. What they found beneath those warped and water-stained boards would change not only Sarah's life, but potentially the understanding of one of the most pivotal battles in American history. The building she had purchased for $450 was about to reveal that some secrets are worth far more than the cost of the real estate that protects them. 3 months after purchasing Morningstar Bakery, Sarah Williams stood in her kitchen at 4:30 a.m., hands covered in flour and her back aching from hours of preparation, questioning whether courage and determination were sufficient to overcome the brutal mathematics of small business survival. The romantic notion of owning her own bakery had collided with the harsh reality of 18-hour workdays, razor-thin profit margins, and the constant anxiety that one equipment failure or slow week could destroy everything she had worked to rebuild. The manila envelope from Dauphin County Tax Assessment Office lay unopened on her kitchen counter, but Sarah already knew what it contained. Property tax bills that would consume nearly 2 weeks of revenue due in 60 days' weather. Her business was thriving or struggling. The quarterly sales tax payment was due in 3 weeks. Utilities were running higher than projected as winter approached, and her commercial insurance premium would require renewal in January. Most concerning was the walk-in cooler, which had been making increasingly alarming mechanical noises and struggling to maintain proper temperature during the recent heat wave. The repair estimate from Harrisburg Commercial Refrigeration had been devastating. $2,800 for a complete compressor replacement, or $4,200 for a newer used unit that would provide reliability for at least 5 years. Either option represented more money than Sarah had available, and the cooler's failure would mean losing all her perishable inventory while being unable to store fresh ingredients for daily production. It was exactly the kind of equipment crisis that had contributed to Dorothy Martinez's eventual failure. Sarah understood with crystal clarity how quickly a single expensive repair could transform modest success into business catastrophe. The irony wasn't lost on her that Morningstar Bakery was actually succeeding in ways that the previous 3 attempts had not. Her customer base had grown steadily to nearly 100 regular customers, with weekend volume sometimes reaching 150 daily transactions. Her custom cake orders were booked 3 weeks in advance, and word-of-mouth recommendations were bringing new customers from across Central Pennsylvania who specifically sought out her more sophisticated flavor combinations. Yesterday's sales had totaled $347. her highest single-day revenue since opening. Her signature maple bourbon cake had sold out before noon, and she had taken orders for 2 wedding cakes that would generate over $800 in revenue. Local food bloggers had begun featuring Morningstar Bakery in their recommendations. And the Harrisburg Chamber of Commerce had invited her to participate in their upcoming Taste of the Capital event. But success without sufficient capital reserves meant operating on a financial knife's edge where any unexpected expense could prove catastrophic. Sarah's savings account contained $1,200, enough to cover exactly 3 weeks of operating expenses if revenue disappeared entirely, but insufficient to address major equipment repairs or seasonal fluctuations that could reduce income during slower winter months. The stress was taking a physical toll that Sarah tried to hide from her sister Rebecca and the customers who depended on her cheerful demeanor. She was losing weight despite being surrounded by pastries all day, surviving on 4 hours of sleep nightly, and developing the chronic back pain that seemed to plague every baker who spent long hours leaning over prep tables. More troubling was the growing realization that even modest success might not be sustainable at her current scale of operation. To generate sufficient income to both cover living expenses and build necessary capital reserves, Sarah would need to either dramatically increase volume or raise prices to levels that might alienate the working-class customers who formed the core of her clientele. The phone call that would change everything came at 6:15 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in November. While Sarah was preparing the day's first batch of dinner rolls for her lunchtime customers. "Sarah, I'm sorry to call so early." Rebecca's voice carried an urgency that immediately captured Sarah's attention. "I just got off a 12-hour shift, and I've been thinking about your situation all night. Need to talk seriously about your finances." Rebecca had visited the bakery the previous weekend and observed firsthand the exhausting pace that Sarah was maintaining while trying to balance quality, customer service, and financial survival. As a nurse with emergency department experience, Rebecca had developed expertise in recognizing when people were pushing themselves beyond sustainable limits. "I can see how hard you're working, and I'm incredibly proud of what you've built," Rebecca continued. "But I'm also terrified that you're going to work yourself into a medical emergency while trying to save a business that might not be financially viable at this scale." The conversation that followed forced Sarah to confront realities she had been avoiding through sheer determination and 18-hour workdays. Rebecca had researched small business failure rates and discovered that most restaurant operations required 18 to 24 months to achieve sustainable profitability. Even with adequate initial capitalization, you're trying to bootstrap a business with virtually no capital reserves, Rebecca explained with the brutal honesty that their relationship had always demanded. That means any equipment failure, seasonal slowdown, or unexpected expense could force you to close, regardless of how good your products are or how hard you're willing to work. Rebecca had also researched the specific history of the building Sarah had purchased, discovering public records that revealed why previous tenants had failed. Despite producing quality products and building loyal customer bases, the combination of old infrastructure, seasonal variations in foot traffic, and Harrisburg's limited market for premium baked goods created challenges that required substantial financial cushions to survive. Dorothy Martinez wasn't incompetent, Rebecca continued. She was an excellent baker with dedicated customers. But she couldn't survive an equipment failure during a slow season because she didn't have adequate reserves. You're following exactly the same pattern, just with different products. The harsh assessment stung because it was accurate. Sarah had been so focused on proving that she could rebuild her life through determination and skill that she had ignored the mathematical realities of undercapitalized small business operations. Her success was real, but it was also fragile in ways that no amount of hard work could completely overcome. "What are you suggesting?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew Rebecca's recommendation. "I think you should seriously consider selling the building, while you still have positive equity in using the proceeds to either recapitalize the business properly or find a different opportunity that doesn't require as much physical and financial risk." Rebecca had researched property values in downtown Harrisburg and discovered that Sarah's building, despite its problems, was worth significantly more than the $450 she had paid. The location near the state capitol, the historic architecture, and the gradual revitalization of the arts district had increased property values considerably over the past 2 years. A local realtor told me that buildings like yours are selling for $35,000 to $45,000. Depending on condition, Rebecca explained. That would give you enough capital to either invest properly in the bakery business or pursue other opportunities without. The constant stress of operating on financial margins that allow no room for error. The suggestion made practical sense, but it also felt like admitting defeat just as Sarah was beginning to prove that her skills and determination could create something valuable. Selling the building would eliminate the immediate financial pressure, but it would also mean abandoning the independence and creative fulfillment that had made the past 3 months the most satisfying work of her professional life. More importantly, selling would mean acknowledging that Rebecca was right about the mathematical impossibility of bootstrapping a successful business with inadequate capital. Sarah would be trading the possibility of long-term success for short-term financial security, essentially accepting that her circumstances limited her to safer, more conventional paths. That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment above the bakery, surrounded by financial records and business projections that confirmed Rebecca's concerns about sustainability. Her revenue was growing steadily, but her expenses were also increasing. As equipment aged and seasonal utility costs rose, the gap between income and security remained constant, leaving her vulnerable to any unexpected crisis. The damaged floorboards near the back wall of her kitchen seemed to mock her deliberations, their warped conditions serving as a visible reminder of problems that would eventually require attention regardless of her financial circumstances. The repair estimate from a local contractor had been $800 manageable if her business maintained current revenue levels, but potentially devastating if combined with other unexpected expenses. As Sarah reviewed her options, she realized that her decision would ultimately define not just her immediate future, but her fundamental approach to risk, security, and the pursuit of goals that required accepting uncertainty in exchange for the possibility of achieving something meaningful. The safe choice was obvious. Sell the building, take the profit, and use the capital to either invest properly in a bakery business or pursue opportunities that offered more predictable financial outcomes. Rebecca's analysis was mathematically sound. Sarah's current trajectory involved risks that extended beyond mere business failure to potential physical and emotional exhaustion. But the safe choice also meant abandoning the vision that had sustained her through the darkest period of her life. For 3 months, Sarah had experienced the satisfaction of creating products that brought genuine joy to her customers, the pride of building something entirely through her own efforts, and the daily proof that her professional skills retained their value despite the bankruptcy that had nearly destroyed her confidence. More fundamentally, selling would mean accepting that financial security was more important than the possibility of achieving independence and creative fulfillment. It would be a practical decision that prioritized avoiding failure over pursuing success, reducing risk at the cost of eliminating the possibility of building something truly her own. Sarah's decision crystallized as she watched the sunrise illuminate the Pennsylvania State Capitol dome through her apartment window. The same view that had convinced her 3 months earlier that Harrisburg could provide the foundation for rebuilding her life. She would continue operating the bakery, but with modifications that addressed Rebecca's legitimate concerns about sustainability and capital reserves. Instead of selling the building, Sarah would implement a more aggressive approach to revenue growth while maintaining strict cost controls that would allow her to build financial reserves more quickly. She would expand her custom cake business, which offered higher profit margins than daily baked goods. She would establish wholesale relationships with local restaurants and cafes that could provide steadier income streams. Most importantly, she would set specific financial benchmarks that would determine whether the business was truly viable or whether she needed to reconsider her strategy. The commitment represented a middle path between reckless optimism and premature surrender. Sarah would give herself 6 more months to prove that Morningstar Bakery could become financially sustainable, but with clear metrics that would prevent emotional attachment from overriding practical judgment. Her first step was addressing the immediate equipment crisis that threatened to derail her progress. Rather than spending $2,800 on compressor repairs, Sarah decided to lease a newer commercial cooler that would provide reliability, while spreading the cost over manageable monthly payments. The lease would cost $180 per month for 3 years, expensive, but less risky than investing thousands in repairs for equipment that might fail again. More importantly, Sarah began implementing systems that would allow her to increase revenue without proportionally increasing her workload. She hired her first part-time employee, Maria Santos, a culinary arts student from the local community college who could handle basic preparation tasks while learning advanced techniques. The additional labor cost was $12 per hour for 20 hours weekly, but it freed Sarah to focus on higher-value activities like custom cake creation and business development. Sarah also began developing wholesale relationships that could provide steady income streams independent of retail foot traffic. Her dinner rolls and sandwich bread were becoming popular with local restaurants, and she identified opportunities to supply baked goods to offices and events that could generate larger, more predictable orders. The most significant change was Sarah's decision to raise prices on custom cakes to levels that reflected their true value and the time required for their creation. Her previous pricing had been based on competing with chain bakeries rather than positioning herself as a specialist who offered unique products unavailable elsewhere. The price increases were substantial, from $45 to $75 for basic custom cakes, from $150 to $250 for elaborate wedding desserts, but they better reflected the premium quality and artistic skill that distinguished her work. The response from customers was surprisingly positive. Rather than losing orders, Sarah discovered that higher prices actually enhanced her reputation by signaling premium quality. Customers who were willing to pay for custom cakes preferred working with a baker who valued her own expertise highly enough to charge appropriately for it. Within 6 weeks of implementing these changes, Sarah's financial situation had improved dramatically. Her average weekly revenue increased from $1,800 to $2,400. While her labor costs decreased as a percentage of sales, because Maria's assistance allowed Sarah to focus on higher margin activities. Most importantly, she was finally able to begin building the capital reserves that would provide security against equipment failures and seasonal fluctuations. The physical demands of running the bakery remained intense, but the addition of part-time help allowed Sarah to reduce her schedule from 18-hour days to a more sustainable 14 hours. She was sleeping better, eating more regularly, beginning to envision a future where business success didn't require sacrificing her health and well-being. By February, Morningstar Bakery was generating consistent profits that allowed Sarah to address deferred maintenance issues while continuing to build her capital reserves. She had accumulated $3,500 in savings, enough to handle minor equipment failures while maintaining operations. Her customer base had grown to over 200 regular patrons, and her reputation for custom cakes was attracting orders from across central Pennsylvania. Satisfying was the realization that her decision to continue operating the bakery, despite financial pressures, had been vindicated by results that exceeded her most optimistic projections. The business was becoming genuinely sustainable, not just a testament to her willingness to work exhausting hours for minimal compensation, but it was Sarah's decision to finally address the water-damaged floorboards that had bothered her since purchasing the building that would transform her modest business success into something she could never have imagined. The repair project that she had delayed for months due to financial constraints was about to reveal that some problems, when properly investigated, contained solutions more valuable than the cost of fixing them. The damaged flooring near the back wall had been getting progressively worse throughout the winter, with several boards now buckling severely enough to create safety hazards for anyone working in that area of the kitchen. Sarah could no longer postpone the repair, both for safety reasons and because the warped boards were affecting the placement of equipment and creating cleaning difficulties. She had finally saved enough money to hire Tom Bradley, a local contractor who specialized in historic, but it was Sarah's decision to finally address the water-damaged floorboards that had bothered her since purchasing the building that would transform her modest business success into something she could never have imagined. The repair project that she had delayed for months due to financial constraints was about to reveal that some problems, when properly investigated, contained solutions more valuable than the cost of fixing them. The damaged flooring near the back wall had been getting progressively worse throughout the winter, with several boards now buckling severely enough to create safety hazards for anyone working in that area of the kitchen. Sarah could no longer postpone the repair, both for safety reasons and because the warped boards were affecting the placement of equipment and creating cleaning difficulties. She had finally saved enough money to hire Tom Bradley, a local contractor who specialized in historic building renovation and had experience working with the kind of old wood flooring found throughout downtown Harrisburg. Tom's initial assessment was consistent with previous estimates. The damage appeared to be caused by an old leak that had since been resolved, and repair would require removing the affected boards and replacing them with matching vintage wood. The good news is that this looks like old damage that's not getting worse, Tom explained during his inspection. The bad news is that we'll need to remove quite a bit of flooring to access the affected area properly. But once we replace these boards, you shouldn't have any more problems. The repair work was scheduled for the first week of March, during a period when Sarah could close the bakery for 2 days without losing significant revenue. She had arranged to use Maria's family kitchen to prepare custom cake orders, ensuring that her most important customer commitments could be fulfilled even while her own facility was under construction. Neither Sarah nor Tom Bradley expected that removing the damaged floorboards would reveal anything more interesting than old pipes in the building's original foundation. Historic buildings often contain surprises: old newspapers used as insulation, forgotten personal items dropped by previous occupants, occasionally coins or small artifacts that had been lost decades earlier. But the building that Sarah had purchased for $450 was about to prove that some secrets are preserved not by accident but by design, hidden deliberately by people who understood that future circumstances might require access to information that contemporary conditions made too dangerous to reveal. As Tom Bradley prepared to begin the floor repair that would change Sarah Williams's life forever, neither of them could have imagined that they were about to uncover documents that would alter historians' understanding of the Civil War's most decisive battle. The water damage that had seemed like a liability was about to reveal itself as the protective mechanism that had preserved materials more valuable than any amount of bakery equipment. The building purchased by a desperate woman trying to rebuild her life was about to demonstrate that sometimes the greatest discoveries emerged not from seeking treasure, but from having the courage to address problems that others had been willing to ignore. Sarah's commitment to fixing her damaged floorboards would soon prove that persistence in addressing immediate challenges can lead to opportunities beyond imagination. On Sunday evening, March 5th, as Sarah completed her final preparations before the contractor's arrival the following morning, she felt the satisfaction of a business owner who had successfully navigated the most dangerous period of small business. Survival. Morningstar Bakery was profitable, growing, and positioned for continued success. The floor repair represented an investment in long-term facility improvement rather than a crisis that threatened her survival. She had no way of knowing that the damaged boards scheduled for removal the next morning were protecting documents that would transform her from a local bakery owner into a central figure in one of the most significant historical discoveries in Pennsylvania's modern history. A building that had seemed like a desperate gamble was about to reveal that courage in addressing immediate challenges sometimes leads to rewards that transcend every reasonable expectation. The Monday morning that would change everything was about to begin. The sound of Tom Bradley's crowbar striking the first damaged floorboard at 7:30 a.m. on Monday, March 6th, echoed through Morningstar Bakery like the opening note of a symphony that would soon crescendo into something Sarah Williams could never have imagined. She stood watching from the kitchen doorway, coffee cup in hand, as the contractor began the floor repair that had been delayed for 6 months. While she struggled to build her business into something financially sustainable, "These old boards are going to come up hard," Tom muttered, positioning his tools carefully to avoid damaging surrounding flooring that remained in good condition. "Looks like they used some kind of heavy-duty adhesive when this floor was originally installed. It's probably back in the 1920s. Going to take some real muscle to get them loose." Sarah had scheduled the repair work during her slowest period of the week, closing the bakery Monday and Tuesday to allow Tom complete access to the kitchen area. She had arranged to fulfill her existing custom cake orders using Maria Santos's family kitchen, ensuring that her most important customer commitments wouldn't be disrupted by the construction work. The past week had been spent preparing for the temporary closure, completing as much advanced preparation as possible, moving equipment away from the work area and notifying regular customers about the brief interruption in service. Sarah had also used the time to deep clean areas of the kitchen that were normally inaccessible, treating the closure as an opportunity for maintenance that was difficult to accomplish during regular operating hours. Tom Bradley was a craftsman in his mid-50s who had spent 3 decades working on historic buildings throughout central Pennsylvania. His reputation for quality work and attention to period-appropriate details had made him the preferred contractor for property owners who wanted repairs that maintained architectural integrity while meeting modern safety standards. "I've worked on a lot of buildings from this era," Tom explained as he examined the extent of the damage more closely. Like the water staining pattern suggests, this was probably a slow leak that went on for months, maybe years, before it was finally addressed. "The good news is that the subflooring looks solid, so we won't need to do any structural work." Sarah felt relief at avoiding additional expense, but she was also curious about what might have caused the original water damage. The building's plumbing had been updated during the 1990s, and neither she nor Mrs. Chen had found evidence of ongoing leaks that might explain the concentrated damage in this particular area. "Any idea what might have caused the original problem?" Sarah asked, watching as Tom used a flashlight to examine the space between the damaged boards. "Hard to say without seeing more of the subfloor," Tom replied, working the crowbar under the first board with careful measured pressure. Could have been a pipe leak, roof drainage problem, or even just condensation from equipment that used to be located in this area. These old buildings have seen a lot of changes over the decades. The first board came free with a sharp crack that sent dust and debris scattering across the kitchen floor. Tom examined the removed piece carefully, noting the extent of water damage and the type of wood that would need to be matched for the repair. "This is good quality oak flooring," he observed, running his fingers along the grain pattern. "Probably milled locally, back when there were still hardwood forests throughout this part of Pennsylvania. Going to be expensive to match, but I know where to find reclaimed wood that should work perfectly," as Tom continued, removing damaged boards. Sarah returned to her preparation work for the custom cake orders she would be completing at Maria's kitchen. The temporary disruption was inconvenient, but it also provided an opportunity to step back from the daily intensity of bakery operations and focus on the creative aspects of her work that had originally attracted her to professional baking. The sound of Tom's work provided a steady background rhythm as Sarah organized ingredients and equipment for transport to Maria's family kitchen. She had 3 wedding cakes to... "I'm not sure exactly," Tom replied, directing his flashlight beam toward the exposed subfloor. "But there's definitely something unusual down here. Looks like some kind of deliberately constructed space, not just the normal area between floor joists." Sarah knelt beside Tom and peered into the opening created by the removed floorboards. The flashlight beam illuminated what appeared to be a small cavity that had been carefully carved into the building's original structural timbers. Unlike the random spaces typically found beneath flooring, this area showed clear evidence of intentional construction: smooth walls, precise dimensions, and what looked like protective wrapping around objects that had been deliberately placed. This wasn't done recently," Tom continued, his contractor's expertise immediately evident in his assessment of the construction techniques. "The wood shows the same aging and oxidation as the rest of the building's original structure. Someone created this hiding space during the building's initial construction, probably in the 1920s. The discovery was intriguing, but Sarah's first concern was whether it would complicate the floor repair or require additional work that might exceed her budget. "Does this change the scope of the repair work? Are we looking at additional costs?" "Shouldn't affect the flooring repair at all," Tom assured her. "But before we cover this back up, we should probably see what's down there. Could be historically significant, especially in a building this old. And if there's anything valuable, you have every right to it as the property owner." Rate accelerate as she contemplated the possibility of discovering something significant in her building's hidden spaces. The romantic part of her imagination immediately conjured images of forgotten treasures or historically important documents, while the practical part of her mind focused on the legal and logistical complications that any significant discovery might create. "How do we safely examine what's down there?" Sarah asked, her curiosity overcoming her caution about potential complications. Tom had encountered similar situations during his decades of work on historic buildings. "I've got proper equipment in my truck-extended flashlights, small mirrors, tools for safely retrieving objects without damaging them. The key is documenting everything carefully before we disturb anything. Just in case this turns out to be historically significant." Over the next 30 minutes, Tom systematically photographed the hidden cavity from multiple angles, while Sarah documented the discovery process with her phone camera. The space appeared to be approximately 18 inches long, 12 inches wide, and 6 inches deep, large enough to contain substantial objects while remaining completely hidden beneath the kitchen flooring. The protective wrapping around the hidden objects appeared to be oiled leather, similar to materials used for preserving documents or valuable items during the early 20th century. The leather showed remarkable preservation, suggesting that the hiding space had remained dry and protected from environmental damage throughout the building's 9 decades of use. "I'm going to carefully extract the wrapped bundle," Tom explained, using specially designed tools that allowed him to lift objects without applying pressure that might damage fragile materials. Based on the way it's positioned and wrapped, someone wanted to preserve whatever this is for a very long time. The bundle came free easily, revealing itself to be a leather portfolio approximately 15 inches long and 10 inches wide, secured with brass clasps that showed the patina of age but remained functional. The craftsmanship was immediately apparent, hand-tooled leatherwork with decorative elements that suggested both skill and significant investment in creating a protective container for valuable contents. Sarah accepted the portfolio from Tom. With trembling hands, feeling the weight of something that had been hidden for nearly a century, the leather was supple despite its obvious age, and the brass hardware bore maker's marks that appeared to be from the late 19th or early 20th century. "This is definitely old," Sarah observed, examining the portfolio's construction details. The leatherwork and hardware looked like they could be from the 1890s or early 1900s. But why would someone hide it under the floor when the building was constructed? Tom had encountered similar discoveries during his restoration work on historic properties. Sometimes people hid valuable documents or family heirlooms during construction, planning to retrieve them later. Could be legal papers, family photographs, maybe even money or jewelry. Only one way to find out what's inside. The portfolio's brass clasps opened smoothly despite their age, revealing contents that had been protected from light and moisture. For decades, Sarah carefully lifted the leather flap to expose documents that appeared to be maps and handwritten papers, remarkably preserved and immediately recognizable as much older than the portfolio that protected them. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible as she examined the top document. "Tom, these aren't from the 1920s. Look at this handwriting. Look at the paper.
Oh.
This looks like it could be from the 1800s.
Oh.
The top document was a hand-drawn map on thick cream-colored paper that showed geographic features Sarah immediately recognized. Mountain ranges, river systems, and town locations were depicted with the careful precision of military cartography, but the style and techniques were clearly from a much earlier period than the building's construction. More intriguingly, the map contained detailed notations and elegant script that appeared to be military and nature troop positions, supply routes, and strategic observations written in the careful handwriting of someone with formal education. And military training? "Sarah, look at this date," Tom said, pointing to numerals written in the upper right corner of the map. "Does that say 1863? Sarah examined the date more carefully, her heart racing as she realized the potential significance of what they had discovered. "It does say 1863. And look at these place names: Gettysburg, Chambersburg, Carlisle. Tom, I think we're looking at Civil War-era military documents." The implications were staggering. If these documents were authentic Civil War materials, they could represent one of the most significant historical discoveries in Pennsylvania in decades. But Sarah's immediate concern was understanding why such valuable historical documents would have been hidden in a building constructed 60 years after the Civil War ended. As Tom continued photographing the portfolio and its contents, Sarah carefully examined additional documents that revealed even more remarkable details. The handwritten papers included what appeared to be detailed military orders, troop strength assessments, and strategic planning documents, all written in the same elegant script and showing consistent dating from June and July 1863. Most remarkable was a document that appeared to be signed R.E. Lee, a signature that, if authentic, would indicate these were Confederate military documents created during the period immediately before and during the Battle of Gettysburg. Tom, contact someone who knows about Civil War history, Sarah said, her voice shaking with excitement and apprehension. If these documents are authentic, they could be incredibly valuable, but they also might be fake. I need expert advice before we do anything else. Tom nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Yes, you're absolutely right to be careful. If these are real Civil War documents, especially anything connected to Gettysburg, we're talking about materials that could be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. But authentication is critical before anyone gets excited about historical significance. Sarah's mind raced through the implications of the discovery. Authentic Civil War documents, particularly anything connected to Robert E. Lee or the Gettysburg campaign, would indeed be extraordinarily valuable. But the discovery also raised complex questions about ownership, historical preservation, and the potential attention from collectors, museums, and government agencies that significant historical finds inevitably attracted. More immediately, Sarah needed to understand why such valuable documents would have been hidden in her building during the 1920s, 60 years after the Civil War ended. The timeline suggested that someone had deliberately concealed historical materials during the building's construction, possibly to protect them from seizure or to preserve them for future generations. The first thing we need to do is secure these documents properly, Sarah decided, carefully rewrapping the portfolio in the protective leather covering. Then I need to research authentication procedures and figure out who I can trust to examine these materials without word getting out before I understand what I'm dealing with. Tom agreed to complete the floor repair while keeping the discovery completely confidential until Sarah could determine appropriate next steps. The damaged floorboards would be replaced, but the hidden cavity would remain accessible in case further investigation was necessary. As they carefully documented the portfolio's original position and photographed every stage of the discovery process, Sarah felt the weight of a decision that could define not just her immediate future, but potentially her entire life. The documents, hidden beneath her bakery's floor, might represent financial salvation that would permanently resolve her business concerns. But they might also attract the kind of institutional attention that could complicate her simple desire to operate a successful bakery. I'm not sure exactly, Tom replied, directing his flashlight beam toward the exposed subfloor. But there's definitely something unusual down here. Looks like some kind of deliberately constructed space, not just the normal area between floor joists. Sarah knelt beside Tom and peered into the opening created by the removed floorboards. The flashlight beam illuminated what appeared to be a small cavity that had been carefully carved into the building's original structural timbers. Unlike the random spaces typically found beneath flooring, this area showed clear evidence of intentional construction: smooth walls, precise dimensions, and what looked like protective wrapping around objects that had been deliberately placed. This wasn't done recently, Tom continued, his contractor's expertise immediately evident in his assessment of the construction techniques. The wood shows the same aging and oxidation as the rest of the building's original structure. Someone created this hiding space during the building's initial construction, probably in the 1920s. The discovery was intriguing, but Sarah's first concern was whether it would complicate the floor repair or require additional work that might exceed her budget. Does this change the scope of the repair work? Are we looking at additional costs? Shouldn't affect the flooring repair at all, Tom assured her. But before we cover this back up, we should probably see what's down there. Could be historically significant, especially in a building this old. And if there's anything valuable, you have every right to it as the property owner. Rate accelerate as she contemplated the possibility of discovering something significant in her building's hidden spaces. The romantic part of her imagination immediately conjured images of forgotten treasures or historically important documents, while the practical part of her mind focused on the legal and logistical complications that any significant discovery might create. How do we safely examine what's down there? Sarah asked, her curiosity overcoming her caution about potential complications. Tom had encountered similar situations during his decades of work on historic buildings. I've got proper equipment in my truck-extended flashlights, small mirrors, tools for safely retrieving objects without damaging them. The key is documenting everything carefully before we disturb anything. Just in case this turns out to be historically significant. Over the next 30 minutes, Tom systematically photographed the hidden cavity from multiple angles, while Sarah documented the discovery process with her phone camera. The space appeared to be approximately 18 inches long, 12 inches wide, and 6 inches deep, large enough to contain substantial objects while remaining completely hidden beneath the kitchen flooring. The protective wrapping around the hidden objects appeared to be oiled leather, similar to materials used for preserving documents or valuable items during the early 20th century. The leather showed remarkable preservation, suggesting that the hiding space had remained dry and protected from environmental damage throughout the building's 9 decades of use. I'm going to carefully extract the wrapped bundle, Tom explained, using specially designed tools that allowed him to lift objects without applying pressure that might damage fragile materials. Based on the way it's positioned and wrapped, someone wanted to preserve whatever this is for a very long time. The bundle came free easily, revealing itself to be a leather portfolio approximately 15 inches long and 10 inches wide, secured with brass clasps that showed the patina of age but remained functional. The craftsmanship was immediately apparent, hand-tooled leatherwork with decorative elements that suggested both skill and significant investment in creating a protective container for valuable contents. Sarah accepted the portfolio from Tom. With trembling hands, feeling the weight of something that had been hidden for nearly a century, the leather was supple despite its obvious age, and the brass hardware bore maker's marks that appeared to be from the late 19th or early 20th century. "This is definitely old," Sarah observed, examining the portfolio's construction details. The leatherwork and hardware looked like they could be from the 1890s or early 1900s. But why would someone hide it under the floor when the building was constructed? Tom had encountered similar discoveries during his restoration work on historic properties. Sometimes people hid valuable documents or family heirlooms during construction, planning to retrieve them later. Could be legal papers, family photographs, maybe even money or jewelry. Only one way to find out what's inside. The portfolio's brass clasps opened smoothly despite their age, revealing contents that had been protected from light and moisture. For decades, Sarah carefully lifted the leather flap to expose documents that appeared to be maps and handwritten papers, remarkably preserved and immediately recognizable as much older than the portfolio that protected them. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible as she examined the top document. "Tom, these aren't from the 1920s. Look at this handwriting. Look at the paper.
Oh.
This looks like it could be from the 1800s.
Oh.
The top document was a hand-drawn map on thick cream-colored paper that showed geographic features Sarah immediately recognized. Mountain ranges, river systems, and town locations were depicted with the careful precision of military cartography, but the style and techniques were clearly from a much earlier period than the building's construction. More intriguingly, the map contained detailed notations and elegant script that appeared to be military and nature troop positions, supply routes, and strategic observations written in the careful handwriting of someone with formal education. And military training? "Sarah, look at this date," Tom said, pointing to numerals written in the upper right corner of the map. "Does that say 1863? Sarah examined the date more carefully, her heart racing as she realized the potential significance of what they had discovered. "It does say 1863. And look at these place names: Gettysburg, Chambersburg, Carlisle." "Tom, I think we're looking at Civil War era military documents." The implications were staggering. If these documents were authentic Civil War materials, they could represent one of the most significant historical discoveries in Pennsylvania in decades. But Sarah's immediate concern was understanding why such valuable historical documents would have been hidden in a building constructed 60 years after the Civil War ended. As Tom continued photographing the portfolio and its contents, Sarah carefully examined additional documents that revealed even more remarkable details. The handwritten papers included what appeared to be detailed military orders, troop strength assessments, and strategic planning documents, all written in the same elegant script and showing consistent dating from June and July 1863. Most remarkable was a document that appeared to be signed R.E. Lee, a signature that, if authentic, would indicate these were Confederate military documents created during the period immediately before and during the Battle of Gettysburg. Tom, contact someone who knows about Civil War history, Sarah said, her voice shaking with excitement and apprehension. If these documents are authentic, they could be incredibly valuable, but they also might be fake. I need expert advice before we do anything else. Tom nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Yes, you're absolutely right to be careful. If these are real Civil War documents, especially anything connected to Gettysburg, we're talking about materials that could be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. But authentication is critical before anyone gets excited about historical significance. Sarah's mind raced through the implications of the discovery. Authentic Civil War documents, particularly anything connected to Robert E. Lee or the Gettysburg campaign, would indeed be extraordinarily valuable. But the discovery also raised complex questions about ownership, historical preservation, and the potential attention from collectors, museums, and government agencies that significant historical finds inevitably attracted. More immediately, Sarah needed to understand why such valuable documents would have been hidden in her building during the 1920s, 60 years after the Civil War ended. The timeline suggested that someone had deliberately concealed historical materials during the building's construction, possibly to protect them from seizure or to preserve them for future generations. The first thing we need to do is secure these documents properly, Sarah decided, carefully rewrapping the portfolio in the protective leather covering. Then I need to research authentication procedures and figure out who I can trust to examine these materials without word getting out before I understand what I'm dealing with. Tom agreed to complete the floor repair while keeping the discovery completely confidential until Sarah could determine appropriate next steps. The damaged floorboards would be replaced, but the hidden cavity would remain accessible in case further investigation was necessary. As they carefully documented the portfolio's original position and photographed every stage of the discovery process, Sarah felt the weight of a decision that could define not just her immediate future, but potentially her entire life. The documents, hidden beneath her bakery's floor, might represent financial salvation that would permanently resolve her business concerns. But they might also attract the kind of institutional attention that could complicate her simple desire to operate a successful bakery. More fundamentally, the discovery raised questions about her responsibilities as the custodian of potentially significant historical materials. If the documents were authentic, they might contain information that could advance scholarly understanding of the Civil War while serving the public interest and preserving American history. That afternoon, after Tom had temporarily secured the work area and departed with strict instructions to discuss the discovery with no one, Sarah sat alone in her apartment above the bakery, the leather portfolio on her kitchen table and her phone open to search results for Civil War document authentication. The research was both encouraging and concerning. Authentic Civil War documents, particularly those connected to major battles or famous figures, commanded extraordinary prices. From collectors and institutions, a single letter signed by Robert E. Lee had recently sold at auction for over $200,000. Strategic military documents could be worth even more. But the authentication process was complex and required expertise that Sarah didn't possess. Documents would need to be examined by specialists in Civil War history, handwriting analysis, paper composition, and ink chemistry. Each expert examination carried costs that Sarah might not be able to afford. and the process would inevitably involve multiple people who might not share her interest in maintaining confidentiality. Most concerning was the research that revealed how quickly word of significant historical discoveries spread through academic and collecting networks. Once experts began examining the documents, Sarah would likely face contact from museums, universities, private collectors, and potentially government agencies that maintained interest in historically significant materials. The discovery that had begun as a simple floor repair was revealing itself as a test of Sarah's ability to balance immediate practical needs with longer-term considerations about historical preservation, legal ownership, and institutional pressures that could overwhelm her simple desire to operate a successful bakery. As evening shadows lengthened across her apartment, Sarah made her first critical decision about the documents that would determine how the discovery unfolded. She would research authentication procedures carefully, but she would also consult with an attorney who specialized in cultural property law before allowing any experts to examine the original materials. The leather portfolio that had been hidden for nearly a century deserved careful consideration rather than impulsive decisions that might compromise either its historical significance or her rights as the property owner who had discovered it. Sarah had learned from David's devastating gambling addiction that hasty decisions based on excitement, rather than careful analysis, could destroy everything she had worked to build. But she had also learned from her own bankruptcy and recovery that sometimes extraordinary opportunities required courage to pursue possibilities that transcended ordinary risk calculations. The documents spread across her kitchen table might represent the kind of discovery that could transform her life in ways that no amount of careful business planning could achieve. The building she had purchased for $450 as a desperate attempt to rebuild her life was proving that some investments provide returns that exceed every reasonable expectation. The floor repair that had seemed like routine maintenance was revealing itself as the opening to discoveries that could change not just her financial situation, but her understanding of history itself. Tomorrow would bring decisions about authentication, legal consultation, and the complex process of determining what she had actually discovered. But tonight belonged to the extraordinary satisfaction of knowing that her commitment to addressing problems rather than avoiding them had led to possibilities beyond imagination. As Sarah carefully secured the portfolio in her apartment's bedroom closet, she reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her from bankruptcy and desperation to the ownership of potentially priceless historical documents. The courage required to purchase a failing bakery with her last $450 had led directly to discoveries that might prove more valuable than any business success she could have planned. The water-damaged floorboards that had seemed like an expensive liability were revealing themselves as the protective mechanism that had preserved materials. More valuable than all the bakery equipment she had worried about affording, sometimes the problems that seem most threatening contain solutions that transcend the difficulties they initially represent. But Sarah also understood that tomorrow would bring challenges that would test her ability to navigate institutional pressures, legal complexities, and financial temptations that could either destroy or transform everything she had worked to build. The discovery that seemed like unimaginable good fortune might also prove to be the most difficult test she had yet faced. The documents hidden for nearly a century were demanding wisdom and careful judgment from someone who had already proven her ability to transform desperate circumstances into meaningful opportunity. Sarah Williams, the bankrupt widow who had lost everything to her husband's addiction, was about to discover whether she possessed the knowledge and strength necessary to handle discoveries that could change understanding of American history. The leather portfolio in her bedroom closet contained more than just potentially valuable documents. It held the test of whether Sarah could balance historical responsibility, legal rights, institutional pressure, and personal needs and decisions. That would affect not just her own future, but potentially the public understanding of one of the most significant battles in American history. The floor repair that had begun as routine maintenance was complete, but the real work of determining what she had discovered was just beginning. Tomorrow would start the process of authentication that would either confirm her discovery as historically significant or reveal it as an elaborate hoax. Either outcome would change her life, but in ways she was only beginning to understand. As Sarah fell asleep that night, the Civil War documents secure in her closet, She dreamed of Union and Confederate soldiers marching across Pennsylvania countryside that she now knew intimately, carrying orders and battle plans that had somehow found their way into the foundation of her bakery. The building, purchased as a last resort, was proving to contain connections to history that stretched back to the most pivotal moments of American national identity. The accidental discovery that would transform her simple business venture into something far more significant had already begun. Tomorrow would determine whether that transformation would prove to be blessing or burden, opportunity or obligation, financial salvation, or historical responsibility that transcended personal considerations. But tonight, Sarah Williams slept peacefully for the first time in months, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, she had already proven her ability to transform apparent disasters into unexpected opportunities. The documents hidden beneath her bakery floor were about to test that ability in ways she could never have imagined. But they were also about to reward her courage with possibilities that exceeded her most ambitious dreams. The discovery was complete. The authentication process was about to begin, and the bankrupt widow who had purchased a failing bakery for $450 was about to learn whether she possessed the wisdom necessary to handle materials that could rewrite understanding of the Civil War's most decisive battle. Dr. Catherine Morrison's response to Sarah's carefully worded email arrived at 6:42 a.m. on Thursday morning, just 18 hours after Sarah had finally worked up the courage to contact the Gettysburg College professor whose expertise in Civil War military history had emerged from her exhaustive online research. The speed of the reply suggested either exceptional dedication to her field or genuine excitement about what Sarah had described as Civil War raw documents discovered during building renovation. Ms. Williams, your email has generated considerable interest. Documents from the Gettysburg campaign period are extraordinarily rare, particularly anything that might be connected to Confederate command structure. If what you've discovered is authentic, it could represent one of the most significant Civil War finds in Pennsylvania in decades. I would be very interested in examining these materials. Are you available for a meeting this week? Given the potential historical importance of these documents, I believe immediate professional assessment would be advisable. Please contact me. At your earliest convenience, Dr. Catherine Morrison, Professor of Civil War History, Gettysburg College. Sarah read the email 3 times while standing in her bakery kitchen at 5 a.m., preparing for what she hoped would be a normal day of operation after the 2-day closure for floor repairs. The academic's enthusiasm was both encouraging and concerning. Encouraging because it suggested her discovery might indeed be historically significant, but concerning because it confirmed that her quiet period of private research and decision-making was about to end. The past 3 days had been spent researching authentication procedures, consulting with Rebecca about the legal implications of historical discoveries, and trying to maintain normal bakery operations while processing the magnitude of what she might have found. Sarah had contacted Patricia Chen, a cultural property attorney in Philadelphia, who specialized in representing private individuals dealing with significant historical discoveries, and had an appointment scheduled for the following week. But Dr. Morrison's immediate interest suggested that the academic community would move quickly once word began spreading about potentially significant Civil War documents. Sarah understood that contacting any expert would inevitably start a process that might quickly extend beyond her control. But she also knew that determining authenticity was essential before making any decisions about the document's future. Sarah called. The past 3 days had been spent researching authentication procedures, consulting with Rebecca about the legal implications of historical discoveries, and trying to maintain normal bakery operations while processing the magnitude of what she might have found. Sarah had contacted Patricia Chen, a cultural property attorney in Philadelphia, who specialized in representing private individuals dealing with significant historical discoveries, and had an appointment scheduled for the following week. But Dr. Morrison's immediate interest suggested that the academic community would move quickly once word began spreading about potentially significant Civil War documents. Sarah understood that contacting any expert would inevitably start a process that might quickly extend beyond her control. But she also knew that determining authenticity was essential before making any decisions about the document's future. Sarah called Dr. Morrison's office number at 8 a.m., reaching the professor directly rather than a departmental secretary. Unusual responsiveness for an academic that suggested genuine professional excitement about the discovery. Ms. Williams, thank you for contacting me about your discovery, Dr. Morrison began without preamble. I must tell you that claims about Civil War documents, particularly anything allegedly connected to the Gettysburg campaign, are not uncommon. In this region, however, what you've described has characteristics that suggest potential authenticity rather than the typical wishful thinking we encounter. I understand your caution, Sarah replied, watching through her storefront windows. As early morning government workers began their daily routines, I have some background in research methodology from my business experience, so I appreciate the importance of proper authentication before making any claims about historical significance. That's refreshing, Dr. Morrison said, her tone warming slightly. Too often, people with alleged historical discoveries have unrealistic expectations about both authenticity and value. Your approach suggests you understand the scholarly process required for proper evaluation. Dr. Morrison explained that preliminary authentication would require examining the document's physical characteristics, handwriting samples, paper composition, and ink analysis. The process could be conducted confidentially, with no obligation to publish findings or involve other institutions until Sarah decided how to proceed. The key question, Dr. Morrison continued, is whether you're prepared for the potential consequences of authentication. If these documents prove to be genuine Civil War materials, particularly anything connected to Confederate command decisions during the Gettysburg campaign, they will inevitably attract significant attention from historians, collectors, and potentially government agencies. Sarah had been researching exactly those potential consequences since discovering the documents. Dr. Morrison, I need to understand the implications before proceeding. These documents were discovered on my private property during routine maintenance, but I want to ensure that pursuing authentication doesn't compromise my ability to make informed decisions about their future. I appreciate your thoughtfulness, Dr. Morrison replied. Let me be clear about both the process and your rights. As the property owner who discovered these materials on your own land, you retain fundamental ownership. However, documents of exceptional historical significance often attract institutional interest that can complicate private ownership, regardless of legal rights. She explained that preliminary authentication could be conducted at Sarah's bakery, allowing examination of the documents without removing them from her control. This approach would provide the information needed to make informed decisions while minimizing exposure to broader institutional involvement. My recommendation would be a discrete preliminary assessment to establish basic authenticity markers. Dr. Morrison continued. This would give you understanding of what you actually possess before determining whether to pursue more extensive authentication or institutional collaboration. The approach seemed both professional and respectful of Sarah's ownership rights, offering the expertise she needed without immediate commitment to broader academic involvement. Sarah decided that preliminary authentication was worth the risk of eventual institutional attention. I'd like to arrange a meeting, Sarah said finally, but I'd prefer to conduct the initial examination here at my bakery rather than transporting the documents to your campus. Absolutely, Dr. Morrison replied immediately. Field examination is often preferable for historical materials, particularly when they've been discovered in archaeological context. I can arrange to visit as early as tomorrow afternoon if you're available. They confirmed arrangements for Dr. Morrison to visit the bakery the following day, with Sarah providing directions to her downtown Harrisburg location and Dr. Morrison explaining the specialized equipment she would bring for preliminary authentication procedures. After ending the call, Sarah felt both anticipation and anxiety about crossing the threshold from private discovery to professional evaluation. She spent the rest of Thursday creating detailed photographic documentation of each document and map, ensuring that she would have complete records regardless of what happened during the authentication process. More importantly, Sarah used the time to research Dr. Morrison's academic background and publications, wanting to understand her expertise and approach before entrusting her with potentially priceless historical materials. Dr. Morrison's credentials were impressive: PhD in American history from Yale University, author of 2 books on Civil War military strategy, and numerous published papers on Confederate command decisions during the Pennsylvania campaign. One of her recent articles, titled Missing Pieces, The Documentary Gap in Confederate Planning for Gettysburg, seemed directly relevant to Sarah's situation. The paper argued that historical understanding of Confederate strategy during the Gettysburg campaign remained incomplete due to missing or destroyed documentation, and that private collections might contain materials that could fundamentally change scholarly understanding of Lee's tactical decisions. Reading Dr. Morrison's research, Sarah realized that her documents might not just be valuable artifacts, but potential evidence for historical theories that scholars had been pursuing for decades. If authentic, her maps and military orders could provide direct insight into Confederate planning processes that had remained mysterious since the battle ended in 1863. Dr. Morrison arrived at Morningstar Bakery precisely on time Friday afternoon, driving a university vehicle equipped with specialized storage containers for transporting historical materials. She appeared to be in her early 50s, with graying hair pulled back professionally and carrying equipment cases that suggested serious preparation for the examination. Ms. Williams, she extended her hand with a firm handshake. "Thank you for allowing me to examine these materials. Must admit, your discovery has generated considerable anticipation. Authentic documents from the Confederate command, structured during the Gettysburg campaign, would represent one of the most significant Civil War finds in the region in decades." Sarah led her into the bakery's kitchen area, where she had prepared a clean examination table with white sheets, providing neutral background for the documents. Dr. Morrison immediately began unpacking specialized equipment high resolution, cameras, magnifying devices, and what appeared to be chemical testing materials for analyzing paper and ink composition. "Before we begin," Dr. Morrison said, donning white cotton gloves, "I want to emphasize that this examination is confidential academic consultation. I won't discuss these materials with anyone without your explicit permission, and you retain complete control over any decisions about publication or institutional involvement." Sarah carefully retrieved the leather portfolio from her apartment upstairs. Feeling the weight of history as she placed it on the examination table, Dr. Morrison's eyes widened slightly as she examined the portfolio itself, running gloved fingers over the leatherwork and brass fittings. "The portfolio construction is consistent with late 19th century craftsmanship," she murmured, speaking partly to herself as she worked. Hand-tooled leather brass hardware showing appropriate aging patterns, construction techniques that align with period leatherworking traditions. With meticulous care, Dr. Morrison, the paper shows aging patterns that are extremely difficult to reproduce artificially, she explained while examining one of the maps under magnification. "The ink has the brownish oxidation characteristic of iron gall formulations used during the Civil War period. Most importantly, the cartographic style and geographic knowledge demonstrated in these maps align precisely with what we would expect from Confederate military documentation." Sarah watched the authentication process with growing excitement and apprehension. A positive indicator from Dr. Morrison increased both the potential value of her discovery and the complexity of decisions she would soon face about how to proceed. "The content is particularly remarkable," Dr. Morrison continued.
"While beginning to translate portions of the military orders with evident expertise.
These appear to be operational plans and strategic assessments created during the period immediately before and during the Battle of Gettysburg. If authentic, they provide direct evidence for Confederate command, thinking that has been largely speculative in historical scholarship." She pointed to specific passages in the handwritten orders that describe troop movements and tactical objectives. "This document appears to detail Confederate plans for the second day of fighting at Gettysburg, including objectives that were never successfully achieved." And here she indicated another map. We see what appears to be alternative strategic options that Lee considered, but ultimately rejected. The translations confirmed what Sarah had begun to understand through her own research. The documents contained detailed military planning information that could significantly advance understanding of UHL, Confederate strategy during the war's most decisive battle. Dr. Morrison, Sarah asked carefully, assuming these documents are authentic. What would be their potential significance for historical understanding of the Gettysburg Campaign? She looked up from the magnifying device, her eyes bright with scholarly excitement. Ms. Williams, if these materials are genuine and preliminary indicators, strongly suggest they are, they could fundamentally change our understanding of Confederate command decisions during the most important battle of the Civil War. Dr. Morrison explained that existing historical records provided limited insight into Lee's actual strategic thinking during the Pennsylvania campaign. Official Confederate reports were often incomplete or deliberately misleading, and many personal papers had been destroyed during the war's final months to prevent capture by Union forces. These documents appear to provide direct access to Confederate planning processes that have remained mysterious for over 160 years, she continued. The maps show detailed geographic knowledge and tactical considerations. The written orders revealed decision-making criteria and alternative strategies that Lee considered but never implemented. The authentication session continued for nearly 4 hours, with Dr. Morrison conducting increasingly sophisticated preliminary tests on small samples of paper and ink. Each examination reinforced her initial assessment that the materials were consistent with authentic Confederate military documents from the summer of 1863. The handwriting analysis will require more extensive comparison with known Lee correspondence, Dr. Morrison explained as she concluded her preliminary examination. But the script characteristics, pen pressure, and linguistic patterns are all consistent with samples from Lee's documented writings during this period. Finally, Dr. Morrison sat back and looked directly at Sarah with an expression of barely contained amazement. Ms. Williams, based on preliminary examination, I believe you have discovered what may be the most significant collection of Confederate military documents from the Gettysburg Campaign found in the past century. The words hung in the air between them, marking the moment when Sarah's private speculation became expert validation. Her discovery was not just authentic, it was potentially groundbreaking for Civil War scholarship. What happens now? Sarah asked, feeling the weight of decisions that would affect not just her immediate financial situation, but potentially historical understanding and academic research for decades to come. That depends entirely on your goals and timeline, Dr. Morrison replied thoughtfully. From a purely academic perspective, these materials deserve comprehensive study and eventual publication to advance historical knowledge. From a practical standpoint, authentic Confederate documents of this significance have substantial monetary value to collectors, museums, and academic institutions. She explained that full authentication would require more extensive testing and analysis, including comparative studies with known documents from the period and consultation with additional experts in Civil War history, handwriting analysis, and document preservation. But even preliminary examination provided sufficient evidence to confirm extraordinary historical significance. The question, Dr. Morrison continued, is whether you're interested in academic collaboration that could maximize historical understanding, private sale that could address immediate financial needs, or some combination that serves both purposes. Sarah felt the complexity of the decision weighing on her. The authentication confirmed that her discovery could indeed provide financial transformation that would permanently resolve her business concerns. But it also revealed historical significance that transcended mere monetary value. These documents represented insight into Civil War strategy that had remained hidden for over 160 years. Decisions about their future would affect not just her family situation, but historical knowledge itself. Dr. Morrison, I appreciate your expertise and discretion, Sarah said finally. I need some time to consider the implications of what you've confirmed, but I also have practical concerns about maintaining my business operations while making decisions about these materials. I understand completely, she replied. Historical discoveries often create tension between immediate practical needs and longer-term scholarly value. What I can offer is continued consultation as you consider your options, and if you decide to pursue academic collaboration, I can facilitate connections with institutions that might provide both scholarly resources and financial support. Yes. Dr. Morrison packed her equipment and prepared to leave. She handed Sarah a business card with multiple contact numbers. Ms. Williams, regardless of what you decide about these documents, please know that their discovery represents an extraordinary contribution to historical knowledge. I hope we can work together to ensure they receive the attention they deserve, while serving your needs." After she departed, Sarah sat alone in her kitchen where the Civil War documents lay spread across the examination table. Their significance now validated by expert examination. The Authentication had answered some questions while raising others that were potentially more complex. She now knew with confidence that her discovery was historically significant and financially valuable. But she also understood that pursuing either academic collaboration or private sale would inevitably attract broader attention to both the documents and their discovery location. Word would spread through professional networks, potentially reaching institutions or individuals with interests that might not align with her needs. Most immediately, Sarah realized she needed to secure the documents more carefully than her bedroom closet provided. Materials confirmed to be this historically significant required professional preservation and security measures that her current setup couldn't provide. That evening, Sarah called Rebecca, deciding that families should be informed about the discoveries. Confirmed significance before she made decisions about next steps. "Rebecca, I need to tell you about something I discovered during the floor repairs," she began carefully. "Something that changes our situation significantly." "Sarah, please tell me you're not calling about some crazy scheme that's going to jeopardize the bakery just when it's finally becoming profitable." Rebecca replied with the exasperated tone of someone who had worried about her sister's impulsive decisions throughout the recovery from bankruptcy. "Actually, it's exactly the opposite," Sarah said. "I've discovered something in the building that could solve our financial concerns permanently while preserving historically significant American materials." She explained her discovery and Dr. Morrison's authentication in terms that emphasized both historical importance and potential financial value. Rebecca listened with growing amazement as Sarah described Civil War documents that could be worth substantial amounts to collectors or institutions. "You're telling me that Civil War battle plans were hidden under your bakery floor and you just happened to find them during routine maintenance?" Rebecca asked, her legal training immediately focusing on practical implications. "Not exactly battle plans," Sarah clarified. "More like strategic planning documents that show what Confederate commanders were thinking during the most important battle of the Civil War. The difference is that these documents could have both historical value and practical applications for understanding American history." Rebecca was quiet for a moment before responding. "Hi, Sarah. If these documents are as significant as this professor suggests, you need proper legal representation before making any decisions about authentication, sale, or academic collaboration. Historical discoveries on private property involve complex intellectual property and ownership questions that could affect both immediate decisions and long-term interests." Her legal perspective provided sobering reminder that validating the discoveries' significance was only the first step in a process that would require careful navigation of academic, legal, and financial considerations. But for the first time, since inheriting devastating debt from David's gambling addiction, Sarah felt that she was dealing with opportunities rather than just problems. The documents spread across her kitchen table represented more than potential financial salvation. They were connections to truth about American history that had waited over 160 years for someone with the wisdom and determination to bring them into the light. The building purchased as a desperate attempt to rebuild her life had apparently preserved materials that could advance understanding of the Civil War's most decisive battle. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and decisions about how to balance immediate financial needs with longer-term possibilities for both historical scholarship and personal legacy. But tonight, Sarah felt the satisfaction of having honored her commitment to address problems rather than avoid them, leading to discoveries that could transform both her understanding of history and her vision for the future. She carefully secured the documents back in their leather portfolio. Sarah realized that her decision to pursue authentication had already begun transforming both her understanding of her discovery and her options for the future. Whatever decisions lay ahead, she was no longer simply trying to save a struggling bakery. She was stewarding historical discoveries that could change scholarly understanding of American history while preserving her connection to materials that had found their way into her care through circumstances that seemed increasingly remarkable. The authentication had confirmed that the floor repair she had delayed for months, out of financial necessity, had led to one of the most significant Civil War document discoveries in Pennsylvania's modern history. Tomorrow would begin the work of determining how these materials could serve both historical truth and her practical needs in the 21st century. The discovery was validated. The institutional interest was about to begin, and the bankrupt widow who had purchased a failing bakery for $450 was about to learn whether she possessed the wisdom necessary to handle materials that could rewrite understanding of America's most important internal conflict. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.